Hmm. Time for the final part of my experimental review videos. ParadoxCon is now over, and many new titles have been announced. I noticed one title was not mentioned. It's a meme at this point, although I never expected Rome to get a sequel first. Time to talk about my favorite Paradox game, and the oldest one of the three. I love Victoria 2. Despite how it's aged and the kind of janky systems, I love it. Victoria 2 was my first introduction to Paradox Grand Strategy, and it has a special place in my heart. Due to the age of the game, I will be comparing the aspects such as visuals to the relative date. Released in August 2010, Victoria 2 is another Paradox Grand Strategy game, taking place shortly after the Napoleonic Age into the, obviously, Victorian Age, from 1836 to 1936. As opposed to the more recent, at least, Hearts of Iron games, Victoria is a truer grand strategy game. Its main selling features being a pop system that roughly tracks every sort of person in your country, and a robust economic system. Like all games I have reviewed so far, Victoria 2 also uses the Clausewitz game engine. Music in Victoria 2 is very similar to the others in the lineup of historical Paradox games. Instrumental period songs, more with DLC, none of them with lyrics. Sound effects seem like a much less refined version of those from Hearts of Iron 4, and that makes sense. Interestingly, I do not think there is a single line of spoken dialogue in the entire game. I don't think infantry make any sounds other than stylized marching or grunts. This is kind of a first. Should the lack of something count for or against a score? Spoken dialogue is not necessary for the game, so I won't count against it, at least. Visuals are one of the weakest parts for Victoria 2. Considering how much this game has to simulate and keep track of, a lot can be forgiven. But Napoleon Total War came out in 2010 and has much higher detail models and significantly higher quality portraits. Portraits especially are very bad in Victoria. The map is fine, it's not the highest quality, but the less detailed flat map makes it easier to determine what each tile's terrain is. UI is a bit more basic, with most information and buttons found on separate screens. Much like Stellaris, roleplay is the name of the game. However, thanks to the economic system, the variety in options is much greater, and what constitutes winning is much more variable. I do wonder if the reason Victoria 3 is not coming out is due to the themes taking place around the era. Colonization may not sit well in this current year. Certainly, any game, even a historical game, depicting China as fragmented or not communist, will not be received by the People's Republic. Industrialization and general empire building are the other themes of note. Technically, a completely pacifist game can be played if the correct nation is selected from the start. Victoria 2 is a game about numbers. While this is technically true for most games, it is much more blatant with Vicky. It's an odd combination of indirect control and micromanagement. Pop manipulation is slow when it isn't indirect, and the combat has similar issues to Hearts of Iron 4. The AI leaves even more to be desired, as it has a lot more to deal with. The economy is confusing and almost counterintuitive when you understand it. None of these matter. Victoria 2 does so much that most other games don't even touch. In a more basic sense, Victoria is a true grand strategy game. You don't just control one or two aspects of a country, typically military and production or research. You control basically all of them, managing pops, bureaucracy, military, tech, industrialization, business, diplomacy, and etc. I never played EU Rome, but I think that is the only other game that approaches this true version of grand strategy. Thanks to Victoria's unique gameplay, despite the age, it holds up. That's not to say that it couldn't do for a new coat of paint, or a revamped economic system, and an improved AI. Trying to review an older game is quite difficult. I'm grateful I picked Victoria. Strategy games tend to hold up better than some genres, and having such unique gameplay helps even more. Time to break with something I said previously. Mods. I don't mind them as much for Victoria 2. I think the age has something to do with it. The game is no longer being supported, despite the unofficial patch recently, so any imbalances or staleness must be made up for by fan content. I would prefer something more official, but that just isn't going to happen anytime soon. I think I've neglected to state that all 3 of the Paradox titles I reviewed have multiplayer. I don't use it, so it slipped my mind, and a game should be able to stand on its single player experience if it has one. It's hard to recommend an older game to a consumer. What makes it even harder is the sheer cliff of a learning curve to get into Victoria 2. Extensive research before playing is basically necessary. Thankfully, a bunch of tutorials and Let's Plays are available on YouTube to help those just starting. Because Victoria was somewhat of a side game, the amount of DLC available is limited, with 3 being game-changing. The DLC is somewhat overpriced, being the same as the base game. I don't think they were reduced in price at a rate similar to the base game. But sales occur often enough that it shouldn't be a problem.